Okay, we're going to take our next step into some music theory concepts. We talked about rhythm and drums, and I'm just setting up a stopwatch because I'm going to try and do this in shorter bits hopefully. So we talked about drums. We talked about the most important drums: kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat. We talked about a measure, that it's 4 beats, 4 quarter notes. Quarter notes can be broken down, so 8/8 notes, 16/16, 30 seconds, 64ths. That kick drum tends to play on beat 1 and 3, snare drum on 2 and 4, and a hi-hat playing a more consistent pattern of quarters, eighths, 16ths, and any variation thereof. These are generalizations. Now we need to talk about the piano. Um, the piano is going to be kind of the basic reference for everything you do in digital music. If you play piano, you have a great head start over anything else or anybody else. But we can all figure it out. We don't need to know the ins and outs and be a great pianist in order to make digital music. So the first thing I want you to do is just take a look at this piano that I have laid out. And what do you notice? Um, Things that I notice is the physical visual pattern of 2 black keys, 3 black keys, 2 black keys, 3 black keys. I notice that. I notice that um, if you start on C, or perhaps easier, if you start on A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it starts over again. So you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 unique notes. What else do I notice? I notice that the black keys are referenced with the same letter as the one below it, but with a hashtag. It's called sharp in music. So there's C sharp and D sharp. But then when I look up here, which is essentially the same note, it's called D flat, or D in a, I'm using a lowercase b in Google Slides. Those are the same note. Using C as the example, C here and C here are the exact same note, but they're higher in pitch. Or this one is higher in pitch than this one. And they're the exact same note, essentially doubling the frequency of the wave, but we don't need to get into that. What is that called? From A to A is called an octave. It's the same note, but it is 8 whole tones apart. So if I start on A, I'm going to use Soundtrap's interface for this. Why don't I see? I was able to. Oh, because I'm off the charts here. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A to A is 8 whole steps, essentially skipping over. Well, it's not entirely whole step. That's skipping over the black keys. There are 12 semitones, or 8 whole tones, 12 semitones if you count the black keys. So from A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, landing on 12. A again, the octave. We're going to be talking mostly about C and C major and things like that. All right, so an octave, these are the same notes. So every time you go from A through G, you're just going to start over again. Those are the only letters you need to know. The sharps. So if I go up from C, our basic level of music theory is going to call that C sharp. But if we start on D and go down to C sharp, we're going to call that D flat. Okay, so C sharp here and D flat, exact same thing. They're basically just different ways of referring to the same sound. All right, so what is a chord? A chord is a combination, it's multiple notes being played together at the same time. So C, if you look at these blue X's, those are the notes I'm playing. C, E, G. That is called the C major chord. It's also called the C major triad, but we'll get to that in a second. So that is the C major chord. What is a scale? A scale is essentially an order of notes, a sequence of notes. We're going to refer to them for our purposes as the notes, the letters, but also in terms of numbers. If C to C is an octave and is 8 notes, each one of those whole tones has a number associated with it. So C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And everybody knows the major scale, whether you think you do or not. Listen to it. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Probably not the last time that I sing, but it probably should be. All right, so the C major scale is the white keys starting at C and ending at C an octave above. From 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, or from 1 to C sharp, from C to C sharp, we're going to call those intervals. All right, any 2 notes that are played from one to the other is an interval. So if we play C, that's the first interval of the major scale. E is the third interval of the major scale. And G is the 5th interval of the major scale. So essentially, it's all white notes. It's the first, skip D, third, skip, 5th. Now, that group of notes is also called a triad. A triad is made up of the first, third, and 5th intervals of the scale. In this case, because we are talking about C major, it's C, E, and G. We can also talk about the C minor triad, which takes that third and flats it, or makes it, in this instance, minor. All right, we'll come back to that in a minute. There's 4 main types of triads. There's the major triad, the minor triad, and major is often referred to as sounding happy, and minor is referred to as sounding sad. There's also augmented and diminished, but we're not going to get into that right now. All right, so you can add intervals to the triad and make more complex chords. So for example, if I'm playing C major, the triad, the first, the third, and the 5th, I'm going to go to Soundtrap for this. And I add B, so this is 1, 3, 5, 7. That is called C major 7 because we've added the 7th interval to the basic major triad. Now, if C, we're going to call it E flat because we're in a minor triad, we would add a flat 7th, and that is C minor 7. Okay, C major 7, happy. C minor 7, saddish, but sounding kind of cool. Okay. The basic C major chord, I've said this already a few times now, is C, E, G. In this voicing, meaning that order of notes, C, E, G, C is called the root or the tonic. And that's really important as we start to think about adding other instruments, especially the bass. As a bass player, when I was playing with guitar players or keyboard players, and I'd say, hey, what chords are you playing? And they would say something like, oh, C minor 7, then we go to F and G. Those main notes were the roots that I cared about because the bass kind of holds down the root. Of course, a bass can play within a chord shape or within a key signature or set of notes or scales, but the basic job of the bass is to hold down the root. So if I play C major a little higher up on the keyboard, I would play C an octave below as the bass note. Okay, I don't really play piano, but we'll get to that again later. What I want to get to is the idea of what are called inversions. And this is probably more than we really need to know right now, but why not? I think it's really the last slide in the piano series. If you're playing C major, it's C, E, G. I'm going to play it. Okay, let's do this so you can see the notes in Soundtrap. So C is the root, but if you play the same notes but starting on E, G, and C, it's the same set of notes, but it has a different feel to it, a different sound to it. It's a different voicing. This is called the first inversion of C major. So the first inversion is E, G, C. And then if you start the chord on G, C, E, that's called the second inversion. So they're all the same notes, but C major is C, E, G, the first inversion, E, G, C, second inversion, G, C, E. And in that sense, say I start G, C, E, and put C in the bass, or as an instrument, it would work. But so would, let me see how I can do this. I don't have enough keys on my keyboard. This is a small 2-octave thing. Let's see. I'll actually start, because I can't play it in G, E, G, C. I can play C in the bass. I could play E in the bass, or I could even play G in the bass. All right, we'll call that our introduction to piano. And what's the most important thing that we need to know? These letter names. You gotta know it. You gotta know it. Everything is based on it. And we'll get to that soon.